This video is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. Are these buildings ugly? What about these ones? And these ones, do you hate them? How about these ones? Set this one aside for now, we'll come back to it later. I've come to the most hated neighborhood in Montreal, Griffintown, to think through a common criticism of Yes in My Backyard pro-housing advocates, which is that we focus too much on the quantity of housing built while ignoring the aesthetics and architecture, enabling ugly buildings. Historically a working-class neighborhood of Irish immigrants, Griffintown lost population in the early 1900s due to economic forces. The nail in the coffin was the city rezoning it in 1963 to industrial, which prohibited people from even rebuilding their homes after a fire or demolition. The new millennium saw new life, with the arrival of this engineering university and a flurry of new residential construction replacing old factories. From a low of just 500 people in the 70s, Griffintown had a population of 12,000 in the last census and should eventually house about 25,000 people. What do people think about Griffintown? From one Facebook comment section. This area is a soulless area with condos and generic stores. It is an area with no soul, no parking, no greenery, and a bunch of hipster nobodies living there. Montreal had a heart and soul, which they're destroying, slowly, but surely by allowing these awful structures. Okay, how does this punctuation even happen? I liked it better before all these condos. This area is now condos. It is a soulless area of the city. Did you know people can review neighborhoods on TripAdvisor? A true eyesore that doesn't belong. A disgusting area of Montreal, nothing but condos blocking sunlight and little to no life. The canal is the one and only appeal of this neighborhood. People say Griffintown reminds them of Toronto. Side note, it's interesting how the word condo, which basically means an apartment you can own, has taken on the generic and often pejorative meaning of shiny new residential building, even if they're rentals. Griffintown became a punching bag for what people don't want to see. More industrial land near downtown to be developed? They don't want to see another Griffintown. Transit-oriented development in the suburbs? We don't want another Griffintown. I wouldn't call Griffintown universally hated, but it's the single neighborhood that I hear the most complaints about in terms of aesthetics, character, and design. So that's why I wanted to come here to get my perspective on architecture and the general livability of neighborhoods. Walking around Griffintown, I do like some buildings better than others. Here are 5 buildings I like more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And here are 5 buildings I like less. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In the context of Griffintown, I generally like buildings with brick or brick-style facades or other texture and detail as opposed to smooth surfaces. I generally like warmer colors like reds and beiges over blues and greens. I like buildings that are white or that mix black and white more than buildings that are too monolithically black or that are very gray. But here are 2 main points of hesitation. First, all of this is subjective, and I honestly don't know whether my judgments here line up with other people's. Let me know in the comments. Second, I just don't find myself as viscerally bothered by buildings I don't like as much as people who focus on architecture and aesthetics seem to be. Even if I don't love a building's look, it rarely bothers me that much. In Griffintown, the biggest eyesore is this old brewery to be demolished, wrapped up for safety reasons. This student residence is also quite ugly in my opinion. But otherwise, I walk around and think, am I supposed to hate this? Maybe I'm biased or I lack the right design background, but it's my honest reaction. I once heard an architect criticize YIMBYs by saying we need to build better density instead of soul-sucking slums. Soul-sucking slums? I can't think of a single neighborhood in my country that I'd describe like that. Maybe if every building looked like this, or if they were run down and dilapidated. This building a bit outside of Griffintown has been super controversial due to the funky colors and blocking views of the iconic 5 Roses flower sign. I actually don't love the look of it either, but I still find it hard to relate to the intensity or level of negative reaction that a lot of other people seem to have. There are a few exceptions, like this main entrance to Montreal Central Station downtown. This is what welcomes people to take suburban or intercity trains here. You even have to walk through a parking lot first. While nothing in Griffintown bothers me as much as other people are apparently bothered, to be honest, I do have the sense that it lacks the charm and character of older neighborhoods. It's totally pleasant to walk through, but not exactly a must-visit neighborhood. The problem is that I don't know how much of that is inherent to the design versus Griffintown being new and different. Old things just have a certain authenticity and gravitas. No new book, music, or movie is going to be as beloved as the classics when it first comes out. Montreal's older neighborhoods weren't built to be charming. They were built for workers from the countryside to live close to factories. It's only over decades, a century even, that they developed their significance and character. Generations of people have grown up and died in these neighborhoods, and people have nostalgia for them. Nobody has fond memories of going to this Griffintown park as a kid because it's still under construction. To many people, new neighborhoods are also tainted by the fact that they're mainly built by for-profit private developers, but the same can be said for most old neighborhoods. We're just far enough removed that we don't think of how these were built for profit and not people. They were built for the greed of the factory owners who brought in workers to toil away. Look at how people talked about Vancouver's West End in 1965. With the greedy onrush of speculators crowding boxy apartment block next to dumpy apartment block, each new one shutting out the coveted view from another, the city has reason to be ashamed of its lack of supervision in a site so fortunate. Fear of the West End led to a clampdown on apartments in Vancouver and even nearby Victoria. But exactly 50 years later, it won the Great Neighbourhood Award from the Canadian Institute of Planners. I don't think it's wrong to question design or aesthetic choices in newer neighborhoods like Griffintown. I just take it with a grain of salt because there's an emotional side to charm and character. Remember the anger about this building blocking the Five Roses flower sign? Nobody would have thought when it went up in the 1940s that a flower advertisement would become a beloved icon of the city. That's not predictable from the actual design or quality of the sign itself. Another reason I find discussions of aesthetics frustrating is that they often don't capture what actually makes or breaks the experience of a neighborhood for me. If we're setting aside concerns like housing supply and focusing purely on the livability of the public realm, including aesthetics but also other parts of the experience, the number one factor for me is street design. How big are the sidewalks? Are there bike lanes? Are the streets loud or dangerous? Are there street trees, furniture, and patios? Griffintown has some larger or less pleasant roads around the edges, but other than that, the street design is actually pretty exciting. The main commercial corridor, Peel, has wide Danish-style bike lanes going up the hill to downtown, to be extended further into downtown within the next few years. The main east-west streets, Ottawa and William, have similarly generous bike lanes. Some segments near construction sites use this temporary design due to truck damage, but this one is the planned final design. Griffintown has different versions of low-car streets that both feel and look nice. Here's one of the earlier transformations before and after, now with more greenery. Here's another overhaul before and after. I love the trees, street furniture, paving stones, and lack of parked cars. It looks so much nicer. That one allowed cars, but this one is fully pedestrianized. This dead end was transformed into this pedestrian plaza, which obviously looks the nicest in the summer with trees. A very recent improvement was this alleyway that I saw being reconstructed a month ago that's now almost done. Who wouldn't want to have a balcony open onto this? After street design, the second most important part of the public realm to me is how the buildings meet the street. This is where Montreal's old neighborhoods really shine. The doors and staircases open directly onto the street and give a lot of detail, life, and interest. Some have detailed gardens out front, and I think this looks awesome. Way better than a suburban lawn. Ground floor retail is another option, although people sometimes forget that not every building can have it. There just isn't enough retail demand for that. Griffintown is a bit of a mixed bag here. There's more retail than a lot of people give it credit for, and lots of residential buildings have individual entrances and patios or porches on the ground floor, although it's still not as universal as in the city's older neighborhoods, and many buildings do feel more closed off to the street. Really, it's not that Griffintown is especially bad on this, but that older neighborhoods of Montreal plexus are particularly good. The third most important factor for me is the architecture of the building as we traditionally think about it. Designs, colors, materials, and patterns above ground level. As mentioned, I tend to find the red or beige brick facades the nicest, maybe because they're historically common in Montreal. Although I can't escape the feeling that a lot of these judgments are particularly subjective. And the fourth and least important part of the public realm to me is the height of buildings. I can grant that taller buildings can make a space feel less cozy. I just think this is less important than all of the other things I've covered. Taller buildings also block sunlight, which is maybe a negative overall, but definitely not always a negative. This building is blocking the sun from hitting me now. But you know what? I don't want to be in the sun. It's 31 freaking degrees. This is my hierarchy of public realm livability. What matters most is the experience at street level. It takes up most of your vision and affects you beyond aesthetics. Compare this nicely redone street in Griffintown with this older section of the same street to be remade later. That aesthetic difference is more important to me than how buildings look when you glance up or see them from afar. This building could be many floors higher without really changing the street experience, in my opinion. Many buildings in Griffintown open onto pedestrian pathways. They look nice and they're pleasant and safe to use. I'd argue that whether your kids have safe options like this to walk to the park just matters more than whether the park has a shadow on it. People here don't seem to mind that much. Many buildings downtown look worse than anything in Griffintown, but the worst part of being here is this 6-lane arterial road. Add a tram, bike lanes, and greenery, and you've got a much better place. I'd argue that we're so used to ugly, hostile, car-centric roads that we give them a pass, even when they matter more to the aesthetics and experience of a place than things higher up. Another problem with aesthetic and architectural debates, from my perspective, is how rarely they acknowledge trade-offs. Some people argue that Griffintown should have been all 3-story walk-up apartments. That would allow far fewer people to live in this prime location near downtown and the canal. Is that worth it to make the neighborhood feel more distinctly Montreal as we've understood the city so far? Maybe, but people don't acknowledge these trade-offs or explicitly make that argument. Griffintown should house about 25,000 people when it's done. Just for simplicity, imagine that every building was cut in half so that 12,500 fewer people would be able to live there. That's a big deal. Griffintowners are rich anyway, they'll find somewhere else. Sure, but that's 12,500 more people competing with existing residents for housing in other neighborhoods like St. Henry, Verdun, or Hochelaga. Is displacing people elsewhere worth keeping Griffintown shorter? Maybe, but you can't ignore this trade-off. Also, actual rich people live in detached homes, typically. Griffintown is more young professionals. That's another reason I take complaints about charm or character with a grain of salt. They're often tied to dislike of people who live there. Griffintown is expensive dorm life for people who never want to grow up. Generally, when judging neighborhoods based on who lives there, people are more sympathetic to families, artists, and longtime residents who grew up nearby, while they're much less sympathetic to young professionals, students, dog owners with no kids, newcomers from other places, and transients, people who might live there for a year or two before moving on. I think it's fine to question how a neighborhood serves certain groups like families or artists in order to have a good mix of people. Griffintown currently lacks a school. There are enough children, about 1,000 of them 14 and under as of the last census, but the project is held up between the city, school board, and province. The schools in adjacent neighborhoods aren't that far away, but I have heard about people leaving because of it. But there's a difference between that and hostility or snobbery against people who live there, like young professionals, students, or dog owners. If you don't want them here, where do you want them to live instead? Alongside schools, people also criticize Griffintown for the lack of parks. I think this is a little overblown. Being next to the Lachine Canal is a pretty great amenity, but it is true that many of the parks are being built closer to the end of the neighborhood's development than the beginning. Here's a park under construction. Here's the site of a future park. Here's another future park. Here's another one. And another future park when the adjacent REM station is built here. While this doesn't replace parks, most buildings here also have common space like courtyards or rooftop patios. One last point on perception. People talk about Griffintown like it's all tall towers, but most buildings here are mid-rise, under 10 stories. Taller than older Montreal neighborhoods, but closer to Paris than to Toronto's high-rise clusters. This building, for example, is 7 stories. This one is 8 stories. Both of these are 10 stories. If you ride along the canal, most of the buildings you're going to see are mid-rise. The high-rises are mostly clustered in the southeast sector, which is what you see when you drive into the city on the highway, but it's actually only about a quarter of the neighborhood by land area. And they're only 15 to 22 stories, roughly. They're just little guys compared to similarly located neighborhoods in Toronto, where buildings regularly reach between 40 and 50 stories. Outside of that southeast corner of Griffintown, almost all buildings top out at 10 stories. Even beside the future REM station, 8 stories. Paris density. But we still hear that Griffintown is like Toronto. I don't know if the critics haven't spent much time here, if they haven't spent much time in Toronto, or if everything taller than 3 stories looks the same to them. But if people are going to complain regardless and not give credit for this mid-rise density, why not go even taller? So that's my perspective on architecture and aesthetics. I do care about the experience of a place, including how it looks, rather than just housing supply. But I usually just don't find myself as bothered by architecture and heights as a lot of other people. I care more about street design and the ground floor configuration of buildings because they affect you much more directly. It's fine to care about or critique architecture, but I have 2 requests to make those discussions less frustrating. First, instead of just criticizing, also share examples you like, ideally from recent projects. So we know you're not just chasing the appealing but impossible target of old buildings good, new buildings bad. Second, I think we should separate aesthetic changes that reduce housing supply from those that don't. I'm less skeptical of wishing for different colors or styles than wanting a building to be half as tall, since that has bigger trade-offs. Maybe those trade-offs are worth it, but we can't ignore them. As for Griffintown, for this video I spent about 10 hours, across a few days, filming and exploring, and I can honestly say that I don't understand the hatred. Lots of the buildings look quite nice to me, and even the ones I like less aren't really that offensive, except for this one. And on the level of street design, which I care about more, Griffintown is way above average in North America. How many developments are building their main thoroughfares through the neighborhood like this? Wide sidewalks and bike lanes, one travel lane for cars, and not that much parking? If I try my best to be fair to the critics, it's a neighborhood in flux, and the Griffintown I can show you today isn't the same one they saw 5 or 10 years ago. A lot of the improvements that have happened, are underway, or are currently planned didn't exist then. Some of the amenities like the parks or the school probably should have been sorted out sooner. I wish the REM station had opened with the rest of the line rather than being a planned addition later as an infill station. But Griffintown is a neighborhood still being built. Of course it's not going to have the same charm, character, and emotional resonance as century-old neighborhoods. If Montrealers can love and cherish views of a flower advertisement, I suspect they're going to warm up to Griffintown. And if it's really not your thing, that's fine, you don't have to live here. This place can only exist if there are lots of people who want to live here, close to downtown, the canal, and transit. I'm probably going to get comments from people saying that Griffintown looks fine, but new developments in their city really are ugly. This could very well be true. But neither that, nor the fact that most of Griffintown is mid-rise, rather than high-rise, saved it from being so heavily criticized. So by all means, encourage better architecture in your city, ideally within a framework of abundant housing, but don't expect it to be a cheat code against NIMBYism. People will still complain. Thanks for watching through to the end of the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and a special thanks to our supporters on Patreon.